Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News, and here are some of the top stories we've been following. U.S. President Donald Trump threatening more tariffs that could affect Canada, this time on lumber and forest products. Plus, a Leger poll suggests more than a quarter of Canadians now view the United States as an enemy. And the wreckage of the crashed Delta Airlines jet cleared from the runway and taken to a nearby hangar at Toronto Pearson.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening more tariffs that could affect Canada. Trump has dropped the idea of a 25% levy on lumber and forest products, saying his administration is eyeing sometime around April for the latest announced duty. Already on pause is Trump's initial planned 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods and a 10% levy on Canadian energy imports. The tariff threats and Trump's talk of Canada becoming a U.S. state is not sitting well with many Canadians, as a new Leger poll suggests. More than a quarter of Canadians, or 27%, view the United States as an enemy country, while another 30% still say they consider the U.S. an ally. Sebastian Dallaire, who is Leger's executive vice president for Eastern Canada, says enemy is a strong word, which is why these results are surprising.
You have almost as many people who are saying that the U.S. is an enemy as opposed to an ally, and that is something that it is in itself quite surprising. There is a partisan difference in terms of how people feel about this, where with conservative supporters being more likely to still see the U.S. as an ally. 48% of conservatives are saying that they still believe the U.S. is an ally, and that goes down to around 20% for all other parties except for the People's Party. So it's clearly a pretty big gap between conservative supporters and Liberal, NDP, and Bloc supporters.
The poll was conducted between February 14th and 17th and surveyed 1,500 Canadians and 1,000 Americans. Because it was conducted online, it cannot be assigned a margin of error. Meanwhile, Trump has called the American team at the Four Nations Face-Off hockey tournament today to spur them on towards victory against Canada. In a post on Truth Social, Trump says he won't be at tonight's final in Boston because he'll be speaking with governors in Washington, adding that, quote, Governor Trudeau would be welcome to join if he'd like. It's part of his repeated suggestion that Canada become a 51st state and that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau can be its governor. That rhetoric, along with Trump's growing tariff threats, have increased tension between the formerly friendly nations, and it's being seen at the rink. All 21 people taken to hospital after a fiery plane crash at Canada's largest airport have now been released. Delta Airlines gave an update this morning as officials work to reopen 2 runways at Toronto Pearson's airport. The airline says it will continue to provide care to those who were on board the Delta flight that crashed upon landing and flipped over earlier this week. All 76 passengers and 4 crew members survived. Meantime, the wreckage of that crashed Delta jet has been cleared from the runway and taken to a nearby hangar. The airline says removing the wreckage took several hours. Delta says it could be weeks before bags from the plane are returned to their owners because of the inspection and cleaning process. Veteran aviator and flight instructor Kit Darby analyzed the landing mishap and cited insufficient flare, which is a tipping up of the nose to decelerate. Despite the significant structural damage, the controlled deceleration of the aircraft on the runway allowed all the passengers to survive.
To hit hard enough to damage the airplane is extremely unusual. I mean, you would be very uncomfortable and the airplane would be fine. As long as you hit on those main gear first, and it does appear to be a main gear landing, the gear is designed to take that kind of abuse. You can make no flare. It should not hurt the airplane. So after that, what happened after that, either something broke, landing gear, tire blew, or landing gear, or we banked the airplane too much and the wingtip hit the ground, or a combination of those. Our video doesn't really show the alignment like that, but it does show the right wing down, which is normal and it explains why the right gear hits first, and also perhaps why the right wing would hit next. And it appears it did hit, and maybe pretty hard. Wings are just bolted onto the airplanes. If you hit the ground hard enough, you can break the wing off, or at least a portion of it. Well, of course, design and strength of the airplane and the seats are key in the survivability of it. But in this case, what really hurts people is the sudden stop. So we're on a large, smooth piece of concrete. We have that initial impact, which isn't too bad, maybe enough to break the airplane, but it doesn't stop the airplane's forward motion. So it's sliding down the runway, and that's why everybody survived. We had a relatively controlled deceleration. Everybody didn't stop all at once, and they all lived, and most of them were uninjured. Crashing on an airport is, if you have to crash, it's a good place to crash.
Oh, I would say so. In other news, a 15-year-old boy is facing first-degree murder charges in the shooting deaths of 4 people on a First Nation in southern Saskatchewan. The boy and 18-year-old Darius Reset are accused of killing 2 women and 2 men at a home on Carry the Kettle, Nakota Nation in early February. Mounties have said the home was targeted, but haven't provided a motive for the killings or said if the accused knew the victims. Both were to appear in court today.
Continued investigation into the quadruple homicides that occurred on Carry the Kettle, Nakota Nation on February 4th has resulted in the arrest of 2 individuals. 18-year-old Darius Reset was arrested in Yorkton, and a male youth who cannot be named according to the Youth Criminal Justice Act was arrested on Carry the Kettle. Darius Reset has been charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. Charges against the youth are anticipated to be laid later today, and we'll provide you with an update with that information as soon as we are able. There's been a lot of speculation about whether the individual identified as a suspect in a separate firearms-related incident on Zagame and Nishnabek was responsible for the homicides. These 2 incidents occurred on the same day within close time and proximity to one another. The RCMP communicated the 2 incidents together as we wanted to warn the people living in those areas to be aware of any potential threats and to remain vigilant while the investigations unfolded. Our thoughts remain with the families, loved ones, and the communities of the victims. They remain top of our minds as this investigation proceeds through its next stages and we work towards a conclusion.
Natasha Calvino, who is Freedom Convoy organizer Pat King's lawyer, says King's sentence of 3 months of house arrest, 100 hours of community service, and 1 year of probation is, quote, very balanced. It comes on top of the 9 months he served before and during his trial. King was found guilty on 5 charges for his role in the 2022 protest that took over downtown Ottawa for several weeks.
The sentencing decision was very balanced. It's very respected. I respect this judge a great deal. But he struck a really good balance between what Mr. King did and what Mr. King didn't do. If Mr. King was to be sentenced to 10 years in jail, which is what the Crown was asking, they would essentially be making him a political prisoner. They would be sentencing Mr. King for the sum total of everything that was done by every individual in the Freedom Convoy. Not only did Justice Hackland find that Mr. King was nonviolent, but he specifically advocated for a lack of violence and found in his sentencing decision today that but for the very vocal actions of Mr. King, things could have been a lot worse. Was he found guilty of mischief? Absolutely. But he was not such a mischief that he should be sentenced for what everybody else did. We're not saying that things didn't happen over the course of the Freedom Convoy that was beyond our purview and that was not intended by leadership, even peripheral leadership by Mr. King. But you cannot sentence one person for the actions of others. And I think His Honor did a great balance in the balancing of the sentence. It is a jail sentence. It's equivalent to 1 year. Mr. King will spend the next 90 days, 3 months back in Alberta under house arrest, and it'd be followed by a period of probation. But this is an end to a very long and very drawn-out process, and we're happy to have it come to the conclusion. You might hate Mr. King, you may love Mr. King, but at the end of the day, that is not the role of justice. We sentence people for things that they did in line, proportionally with their responsibility, and that's what we did.
Ottawa wants to see ads banned from CBC News programming. Outgoing Heritage Minister Pasquale St-Onge says she wants to bar CBC Radio Canada from charging subscription fees for digital products such as CBC Gem. She says that in turn, the federal government would increase the public broadcaster's funding and make it more stable. St-Onge adds that the average funding for public broadcasters in G7 countries is $62 per person per year, and the CBC receives about half the G7 average. And she'd like to bring it more in line with other countries. But the Canadian Taxpayers Federation doesn't think the CBC deserves more money from taxpayers. According to Franco Terrazzano of the CTF, Canada's population is about 41.5 million people, and if the government funded the CBC the way the minister is recommending, it would cost taxpayers about $2.5 billion per year, which is nearly double the current cost.
So the CBC is already costing taxpayers $1.4 billion every single year. And what the minister's proposing would mean that cost would jump up to about $2.5 billion a year, a almost $2.5 billion hit to taxpayers every single year for the CBC. You know, let's just put that huge cost into perspective, right? That amount of money would cover the grocery bill of about 150,000 families. So this government is so tone deaf. After all of the criticism Canadians have brought forward against the CBC, what's the government's plan? The government's plan is to nearly double the cost of the CBC to taxpayers.
The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is instead calling for the CBC to be completely defunded. Alberta Sheriff's Scan Unit obtained a court order to shut down a problem property in Medicine Hat Thursday morning. The order prohibits specific individuals responsible for drug and criminal activity at 48 Cameron Way from residing at the site for 2 years, with any tenant or lease agreement being terminated. The detached garage will be boarded and fenced up until May 21st, with no one, including the owner of the house, allowed to access it. Scan will continue to monitor the site until the community safety order conditions expire in May. The property had been subjected to 18 drug and criminal complaints since April of 2023, and Scan confirmed that since October of 2024, they observed multiple instances consistent with drug activity at the property. Well, as reported on BCN last week, Canada witnessed a massive drop in automobile thefts in 2024 compared to the previous years. However, Hamilton Police in Ontario said this week they uncovered a massive auto theft ring and recovered over 200 vehicles, most that were bound to ship overseas. BCN's Landon Hickok has more details.
Hamilton Police said in a news release on Wednesday they arrested 8 individuals as part of a year-long investigation known as Project Polar Bear. Over the investigation, over 200 vehicles valued at $1.5 million were recovered. As part of the theft ring, the criminals would target high-end vehicles at night to ship them domestically or internationally. Stolen vehicles that would be distributed nationally would be re-VINed, and vehicles shipped internationally were put in shipping containers destined for nations such as Iraq, Ghana, or the United Arab Emirates. Sergeant Liam Breeden of Lethbridge Police says that some of these theft operations that send vehicles internationally can and do occur in Alberta.
What we see is a lot more of those newer vehicles, whether they're taken from rental agencies or off lots and stuff like that, new car lots, like you've said, or just newer vehicles that people have just recently purchased. We have seen them. We've seen them on news, different outlets and things like that, where trackers have taken them to the UAE, to West Africa, and things like that. We do see very sophisticated methods of car theft and stuff like that. Oftentimes that's stuff that we're hearing or seeing through some of the larger hubs, larger cities and things like that, whether that's through kind of key fob cloning or basically the stealing of those signals from the fob to the vehicle.
After historic levels of vehicle thefts in Canada, the federal government enacted a National Auto Theft Action Plan in May of 2024, and since then, the numbers seem to give promising results. The years of 2022 and 2023 saw historic levels of vehicle thefts in the nation, surpassing over 70,000 incidents. In 2024, that number nosedived by 18.6% to just over 57,000 thefts. Quebec and Ontario saw the highest decreases in thefts, with significant drops of 32.4% and 17.4% respectively. Alberta now holds the highest per capita rate of thefts in Canada, even after seeing a 10% drop. Locally, Lethbridge police say that thefts remain low in the city when compared to the province's largest urban centers.
Lethbridge is a little bit of an anomaly in terms of the rest of the landscape of Alberta. From 2022 to 2024, I believe we've gone down in percentage 24% in terms of stolen vehicles, which is a great number. And that's based on several factors and several different initiatives that we've tried to implement. Obviously, through some of our larger hubs, Calgary, Edmonton, some of those bigger centers and things like that, we're seeing more or an increase in auto thefts than we do here, more organized, things of that nature. But we are fortunate here in Lethbridge that we have seen a trend where it's gone down.
For Bridge City News, I'm Landon Hickok.
Thank you, Landon. 20,000 pounds of potatoes. That's how much is in excess at the Lethbridge Food Bank. As a result, the food bank is giving away potatoes to anyone and everyone on Saturday, March 1st. They will be set up on the east side of their building located at 1016 2nd Avenue South between 9 a.m. and 12 p.m. that day. All you have to do is bring your own container, bag, or bin. They say donations are welcome, but not necessary. The abundance is due to an ongoing relationship with local farmers. Isn't that nice? Well, we finally reached above seasonal temperatures with the mercury climbing above the freezing point and reaching the pluses. But the best news of all, it's going to double digits this weekend. I'll be right back after the break with a full look at weather. Well, could the groundhogs have possibly been correct this past Groundhog Day in predicting an early spring? Well, I think so. When you look at these temperatures, pretty exciting. So already today we reached 5 degrees, which puts us above average there. And it's only going to get better from there. Unless, of course, you love the frigid cold, in which case I'm so sorry. But 7 degrees for the high on Friday. Also nice clear skies there on a Saturday. Looking at those double digits, we're going to jump right into those. 12 degrees on Saturday, 14 on Sunday, 10 on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, actually. So rounding out that 7-day forecast with that nice round 10 degrees there. Average high for this time of year 3, average low -9. So all this next week we're going to be above all of that. 19 was the record high on this day back in 1995, and in 1918 the record low hit Lethbridge, which was -41. 7:32 this morning, that's when the sun rose, and sunset this evening at 5:59 p.m. 4 minutes more daylight than we saw yesterday. So we're seeing 10 hours 14 minutes of daylight today. It really does feel like spring, doesn't it? Okay, we got some double digits on the west coast as well. 11 for the high in Victoria, 40% chance of showers, and then actually light rain in the morning and then more rain in the afternoon. Rain as well tomorrow in Vancouver with that 10 degrees. High of 4 in Edmonton and 5 in Calgary tomorrow. So it looks like the rest of the province is seeing those plus temperatures as well as some clear skies there. Now, the good news for these guys here in the prairies, Saskatchewan and Manitoba, we're beyond that extreme cold warning. So now things are getting back into the seasonal range. So look at these lovely temperatures, much better than what we saw earlier. -2 for the high in Saskatoon tomorrow. Regina sitting at -4 and -9 in Winnipeg, with periods of light snow clearing up by the morning there. And as we get into the central part of the country here, Toronto sitting at -4, -8 in Ottawa with mainly overcast skies. -8 as well for the high in Montreal. Fredericton should see a few flurries there, seeing a high of -3 as well. -3 also in Halifax with periods of light snow. -5 in Charlottetown, and St. John's -2, but under a blowing snow advisory there. So up to 70 km/h winds, plus 5 to 10 centimeters of snow. So that's where winter is happening tomorrow in St. John's. There you have it. That is your forecast. Canadian grocers, large and small, are seeking alternatives to U.S. products ahead of a potential trade war. Despite a pause on tariffs proposed for goods crossing the Canada-U.S. border, grocers aren't waiting around to find out what will happen when the truce ends in March. The weaker loonie is also resulting in price increase requests from some of his U.S. suppliers, making it an easier decision for grocers to find Canadian alternatives instead. A new survey says the majority of homeowners whose mortgages are up for renewal this year expect to pay more in their monthly borrowing costs. The Royal LePage survey says over 1 million mortgages are coming due. Most of them were secured when the Bank of Canada's benchmark interest rate was at historically low levels during the COVID-19 pandemic. Royal LePage President Phil Soper says that while rates have been coming down rapidly since last June, they're still well above those pandemic-era borrowing costs. The real estate market in southern Alberta has been steadily growing, but buyers are finding it difficult to buy homes as prices rise due to bidding wars on a dwindling housing inventory. Residential realtor Anne French with Grassroots Realty says that Lethbridge's job market has been one factor for the high demand of used homes.
So the biggest thing, I spoke with an economist recently as people were asking me this question as well. And basically, she explained to me that Alberta has been the lead job creator across Canada over the last couple of years. We've created the most jobs by a significant proportion. And so people from other provinces are coming to Alberta for job opportunities, and therefore they need housing. And so that's what's kind of driving up the prices. And because of the more expensive cost of housing in places like Calgary or Edmonton, people are coming to southern Alberta, and therefore they're finding homes here, and it's driving up our prices here as well.
Catch that full interview with realtor Anne French and BCN's Paul Arthur coming up after the break. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 112 basis points today to 25,514. The Dow was also down 450 points to 44,176. The S&P 500 was down 26 points to 6,117, and the Nasdaq was down 93 points to 19,962. West Texas Intermediate oil was up 32 cents to 72.57 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 10 cents to 4.17 US. Gold was up 24.40 to 29.4380 US an ounce, and silver was up 45 cents to 33.44 US an ounce. Feed wheat's at $8.65 per bushel, barley is at $6.57, canola is at $15.17, and corn is at $8.56 per bushel. Live cattle were up 20 cents to $197.62. Feeder cattle March contract was down $2.20 to $266.82. And lean hogs April contract was down $1.22 to $88.52. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 70.50 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, new tariffs could be on the horizon for Canada, now including our country's lumber exports. U.S. President Donald Trump proposed the idea of a 25% levy on lumber and forestry products Wednesday evening. The tariff threats and Trump's talk of Canada becoming a U.S. state is not sitting well with many Canadians, as a new Leger poll suggests. More than a quarter of Canadians, or 27%, view the United States as an enemy country, while another 30% still say they consider the U.S. an ally. Well, coming up after the break, BCN's Paul Arthur talks with realtor Anne French with Grassroots Realty about the booming real estate market in southern Alberta and what is causing the rise of the housing prices. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or our YouTube page to check out more of our stories and interviews.
Canada continues to be in a housing crisis, with some markets experiencing a serious shortage of housing. Rising inflation, of course, puts pressure on our individual pocketbooks, especially for younger folks, making it more challenging to afford a home. To chat about this in more detail is Anne French. She's a residential realtor with Grassroots Realty, and she serves the Southern Alberta area with the Lock and Key team. So great to have you with us, Anne.
Thank you so much, Paul. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I should tell our viewers you were our realtor a while back, a number of years ago, and we were just actually amazed at somebody relatively young in the business, and going like, wow, you were amazing. So,
great, thank you.
It was a good. So, where are things at with the Lethbridge and surrounding areas real estate market right now? I think prices have continued to increase, right? So, how much year over year?
Yeah, so that's a great question. A few months back, I actually got several phone calls all in a row from people saying, hey, the news told me that my house increased by 10 to 15% last year, so now I want to list and sell it. So from that experience, I got to attend lots of homes and check out as far as where they were at in the market at the time. And so as far as percentage increase, and less so a percentage, I just want to say that they have definitely increased, but it does really depend property by property, depending upon your location in the city or outside of the city, whether you're a condo, a townhouse, a detached home, an acreage, all those things kind of depend. But around that 10% is probably fairly correct, I would say, as a whole overall, but definitely depends home by home. So.
Yeah, and so that's a pretty significant jump for sure. Now, looking back over the maybe 5 years or so over that last period, in Southern Alberta, what is the real estate market doing? Has it been like kind of like every year going up 10%, or some years have been like 2%? Have there been any decreases, or is it pretty much a steady increase?
Yeah, I would say the craziest time period was between 2021 and 2023, somewhere in there. 2024 wasn't quite as big of a jump or an increase as far as what we saw in Lethbridge and the surrounding areas. But I would say that it has steadily increased every year, and especially since COVID times in 2020, mid-2020, that's when the market really started to pick up and take off. And so, yeah, I expect that this year we will continue to see it rise with interest rates continuing to go down. That's been very helpful to buyers in the market as well. So.
Okay. Well, what is the average home price right now in Lethbridge, and where does that put Lethbridge, I guess, in comparison to other cities across the province?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're around 400,000 right now for a single family detached home. Some months we find it's slightly over, and some months we find it's slightly under, but just around that 400,000. And as far as in comparison to other places in Alberta, if you look at Calgary, they're around 600,000. And so we are significantly lower and still one of the most affordable markets, not only across Canada, but of course in Alberta.
Okay, so we can't complain about the prices going up. Big picture, we're doing all right in Lethbridge. What is driving up the prices?
So the biggest thing, I spoke with an economist recently, as people were asking me this question as well. And basically, she explained to me that Alberta has been the lead job creator across Canada over the last couple of years. We've created the most jobs by a significant proportion. And so people from other provinces are coming to Alberta for job opportunities, and therefore they need housing. And so that's what's kind of driving up the prices. And because of the more expensive cost of housing in places like Calgary or Edmonton, people are coming to Southern Alberta, and therefore they're finding homes here, and it's driving up our prices here as well.
I mean, I'm understanding that even townhouses, condos, things like that have increased in price as well. And is that simply, again, because of just the crowded, there's just a lack of supply?
I think so, but I also think it has to do a lot with the demographic of people that are moving here. They're coming from bigger cities like Toronto or places in BC. And so they're used to a condo or townhouse style of housing. They're young business professionals, or maybe they're even retired people who are wanting to get into more affordable market as they head towards a fixed income. And so we're seeing that they're choosing that type of housing specifically in Lethbridge. So when I first started in real estate, condos were incredibly difficult to sell, actually. And, over the last couple of years, you put a condo on the market and it sells very quickly, generally speaking. So. Okay,
that's interesting. Well, I'm curious, is the threat of U.S. tariffs impacting the real estate market at all? I mean, are people kind of holding off because it's, uncertain?
Yeah, I would actually say it's been the opposite. So the U.S. tariffs, with the tariffs coming in maybe on, steel, aluminum, things like lumber, what we're seeing people is holding off on building because the building costs look like they might have to go up. And so that's been a more concern to buyers. So instead, they've been turning to the used housing market, which has actually, of course, increased that used housing market. And made it just more so that people want to go towards buying quickly before tariffs come in or are established, versus holding off.
Okay, that's fascinating. Well, what's the biggest complaint you hear from people hunting for a house when it comes to things that are, making it a challenge for them to actually buy one?
Right. I would say the biggest would be inventory. There's nothing on the market right now. It's significantly depleted in all areas and in all towns in southern Alberta. And so when you're used to seeing, for an example, in Raymond, about 20 houses on the market at a time, we're at about 7 right now. So we're at such a low inventory across the board that people just can't find what they're looking for. And when they do, they go into multiple offers. And that, unfortunately, is a large complaint that I hear, is that, hey, I don't want to be in competing offers because it's driving up the price and it's making me more difficult to purchase. But unfortunately, that is a fact of the current housing market.
Seller's market then at this point, right? So
that's right. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Are you seeing more people looking at maybe moving to, you mentioned Raymond, to smaller bedroom communities like, McGrath, maybe Coaldale, Tabor, that sort of thing, and hopefully finding lower priced homes? And I think they still are lower priced, right? And probably some lower property taxes.
That's correct. Yeah, I would say overall they're lower priced, but yeah, places like Raymond, McGrath, Cardston, Fort Macleod, Coaldale, Tabor, those are the types of areas that we're seeing really boom right now. Once again, getting out of those bigger cities, and even Lethbridge is becoming, it's larger and larger every year, right? And so people are getting out of these types of cities and moving towards the smaller towns just to have the small town feel, but also for the more affordable housing costs.
Yeah, the further away you get from the big cities, right? The prices seem to drop, but then again, you've got the driving and all that kind of stuff and some of the inconvenience, right? So, all right, well, what other options are there for house shoppers? Are we seeing people getting longer amortization lengths on their mortgages? How long of an amortization period can you get these days?
So for an insured mortgage, which is anything below 20% down, we're looking at a 30-year amortization period right now. And that just came into effect, actually. And so that's helped buyers to be able to stretch out that amortization period a little bit so that their mortgage payments each month are a little bit lower. And that's kind of what people are leaning into, is that 30-year amortization.
Yeah, sure drops the prices. And if you're tight on money to be able to afford a house these days, right? Especially for young people.
Right.
I get it. Yeah. Mortgage rates, they have been dropping. Where are they at right now? What's the lowest mortgage you can get? I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, we're between 4 and 5%. And once again, kind of comes back to which institute you go through, as well as if you're an insured mortgage versus a non-insured mortgage. Around 4%, I would say, is the lowest that you can kind of see right now. And that's pretty good, actually. Like, historically speaking, that's very good. Of course, it's not like 2021 and 2022 when it was 1 to 2%, but that was crazy. And so I feel like we're a little bit more stabilized now at that 4%.
Are you seeing a decline in the number of young people looking to buy a home now because of the higher prices? Again, I'm sure the lower interest rates are helping as well, but man, it's a big chunk.
Yeah, it's very difficult for young people to get into the market, but I wouldn't necessarily say I've seen a decline. I would just say that I've seen more creative ways of doing it. So I've seen a lot more parents jumping on mortgages with young people.
Okay, so they're sharing the mortgage sort of thing?
Yeah, so basically they go on title with their kids, and they're called what's a co-signer. And basically they co-sign for the mortgage loan in order to get their kids in a house, or they purchase it for their kids and then help them get in, and then eventually gift that home in some way to their kids. That's a couple of options, or they provide a gift letter for the down payment to those young people, so that they can help get in a home quicker.
Right, gotcha.
There's a few different options.
Yeah. I do hear some of the more interesting ones. Sometimes you get, friends, right? Or maybe it's your cousin or something like that, and you get like 3 or 4 people together to, buy a house together, and that makes it so much more affordable. But of course, makes it a bit of a challenge when one person says, "Okay, I want to sell my portion and move to a different country or something or whatever," and that can be a bit of a juggle, right?
Yeah, a little bit tricky. I don't see that too often. Sometimes for sure, but generally, like if you're buying a house together, you're kind of all on the same schedule where it's like you're going to school or you're all young professionals or whatever. And I find that it makes it a little bit easier for people to make those types of decisions.
For sure. Any advice you have for a young couple, trying to get things together to buy their first home? What do they need to do to get things in place financially?
Yeah, so I think the three biggest things are credit score, your debt ratio, and then of course saving for your down payment. But the debt ratio, I think, is the most difficult thing for people right now. Lots of what I'm seeing is people buying, for example, cars and they take out these huge loans on cars,
Hmm.
and then their monthly payments on those cars are so extreme that it does actually make them difficult for them to qualify for an
Yeah.
actual house. So my advice would be if you're planning on purchasing a house or wanting to purchase a house, maybe take a look at some of the other loans and things that you have going on in your life and try and pay those down as quickly as possible or not get into them in the first place so that you can prioritize purchasing that home. And of course, making sure that you're paying everything that you do have on loan, that will help your credit score every month as you continue to make those payments. So.
Yeah, I hear the stories from my parents, and that goes back quite a ways. But, they were tough times back then as well, and they simply, if they didn't have a couch, they might just sit on a box until they could actually afford to buy the couch, and typically a used couch, or a hand-me-down or something like that. And they made their way up that way and bought houses, and things seemed to work out okay. It's all right. So what about purchasing a house that you can rent to somebody else to help with a mortgage? How does that work with mortgage lenders? Does that make it easier or maybe even more difficult to qualify for a mortgage?
So that's a really big thing in Southern Alberta because, of course, in Lethbridge, you have the college and the university. And so lots of people are looking to purchase homes where they can rent out either suites or room by room in order to help offset those mortgage costs. Now, the only way you can actually use that type of income, though, towards your mortgage is if you have a legally suited property or if you are renting the entire home. So you can't use room by room income towards your mortgage. You cannot use an illegal suite towards your income as well. And illegal suites are very common in Southern Alberta. Um, Illegal is a very scary word. People kind of freak out about that. But in other cities, it's non-conforming or, a little gentler of a word. But basically, it just means it's not permitted, whether that be the kitchen or the electrical or whatever for that basement suite, and it's not registered at a city level. But like I say, it is very common. Probably 80 to
Hmm.
85% of
But that's
Lethbridge
good to
are.
know going
Yeah.
into a mortgage, that what you have to do to qualify for that. Okay. Now, are there certain areas here in Southern Alberta that are more, trending to be popular for buyers than others?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, Lethbridge, the city of Lethbridge, of course, is extremely popular for people. And then Raymond and McGrath and Tabor are booming, like
Okay.
significantly, we're seeing. Fort McLeod as well, and Coaldale. I mean, all those types of places, like within that 30 minutes from Lethbridge, I feel like every community is really thriving at this point. So.
That's fascinating. Okay. Any particular areas within Lethbridge that are kind of more popular than others? I mean, of course, you see that it's expanding, in different areas, right? In the north side, it's expanding. It's expanding on the east side now as well, and of course on the west, and the south is maybe more established sort of thing, and maybe a bit more pricey. But yeah, so what's kind of the favorite area in Lethbridge?
I think West Side seems to be quite preferable for a lot of people because it is a little bit more affordable than the South Side. Um, but it's a little bit more, convenient as far as amenities than the North Side. That's kind of what I'm hearing from people is their preference there. When I sell homes, I typically do sell in the South or the West. The North Side, of course, I do sell properties on the North Side, just not quite as much. But I mean, there's tons of properties on the North Side, so of course people are buying and selling over there as well. So every area of town has its own pros and cons, I would say.
Hmm. And what would be the kind of, I guess, the price range of a home? I mean, obviously, $1 million house, you're not going to sell as many of those. So, what kind of price range would be the one to sell the quickest? I guess is it something like 300,000 price range? It's below the average, or is it just right around that average price?
Yeah, it would be anywhere from 3 to 400,000, I would say would be the most popular, quick moving type home right now. Yeah.
Do you have any fearless predictions where we're headed here in Southern Alberta with our real estate market over this next year? I mean, that's obviously you don't have a crystal ball to look into, but any thoughts? I mean, at this point, it's looking favorable.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Paul. I wish I had a crystal ball and could tell you. I did speak with a mortgage broker the other day, and he just explained how he does predict and is thinking that interest rates will go down one more time. So I do believe over the course of 2025, we're really going to see the market continue to take off, and that this spring and summer are going to be incredibly busy. I've had one of the busiest winters I've ever had this past winter. So I do believe that it is going to be a very busy time in the market, and that you're going to see a lot of buying and selling and a lot of moving people. So
Okay.
yeah.
Well, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate you being with us here today, Anne.
You bet. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, great conversation. Anne French, a residential realtor with Grassroots Realty, serving the Southern Alberta area here with the Lock and Key team. Their website, lockandkeyrealty.ca.
Menopause, it can be a challenging time in a woman's life. Of course, there is the option of hormone replacement therapy, but this can sometimes have some undesirable side effects. So are there some natural solutions for menopause symptoms? Well, joining us today from Kelowna, British Columbia, to discuss this is Liz Whitcomb. She is a natural nutrition clinical practitioner and a women's hormone health practitioner and the owner of Simply Balanced Holistics. Liz, welcome. Great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for having the menopause chat,
Yeah, I think it's important, right? Like, I mean, it's going to hit all of us at some point, sooner or later, right? And maybe first of all, tell us a little bit about your clinic and what kinds of health issues you typically treat.
Sure, yeah. So I mostly work with women of all ages, helping them on their hormone journey. So I work for a clinic right there in Lethbridge, Roots and Fruits. I work with them virtually, and I also work for a virtual clinic up in Fort McMurray, where I used to live, mostly offering nutrition counseling with them. And then I do in person here in Kelowna at a clinic called Soka Healing. So yeah, mostly women, but I do work with men, women, children, you name it, for the nutrition side of things.
All right. Well, since we are talking about menopause, what are the different stages of it and what age range does this typically begin to take place?
Yeah, great question. So we'll start with the perimenopause phase, and there's like 3 phases here that you go through. So there's early perimenopause, which for some women can start in your mid to late 30s, but generally we're looking at early to mid 40s. And during this time, what you're going to see is you're still going to have a regular cycle, but things are going to either get a little bit longer, maybe a little bit heavier. You're going to start to notice like minor changes in the length and maybe severity of your period. And then when you go to mid-menopause, this is when you start skipping months. So you go 2-3 months maybe with not having a period. Few more symptoms start to creep in here. And then you get to late perimenopause, which is when you're getting closer to that 12-month anniversary of no longer having a period. And menopause is actually just like a one-day event. It's like a tick on a calendar, essentially. And it's that 12-month anniversary. Yeah, I know. That it's confusing. So, but it's like that 12-month anniversary of not having your period anymore. And then you're in postmenopause. And yeah, so the average age for menopause in North America is around 51, 52 years old. But the best resource you have to kind of know when you'll go through this transition is to ask the women in your life. So if you have the opportunity to ask your mom, your aunts, your grandmother, genetics play a really big part here. So asking them can give you a pretty good idea of when you'll go through it.
Yeah, I mean, I know my mom seemed to suffer with it for about a decade. That's what it seemed like. So, I mean, and I think that mostly we're talking the symptoms of hot flashes. So, I mean, let's get into some of these symptoms of menopause, and it's possible she was already past it, but still experiencing symptoms. Maybe you can kind of clear that up for us.
Yeah, so with symptoms, honestly, it really comes down, like the severity of them comes down to how healthy you are, essentially, like how well you're feeding your body? Are you moving your body? How's your stress? So some of the earlier symptoms you'll notice are like sleep disturbances and maybe some weight fluctuations. So these you'll see in like the early perimenopause phase. And then you move into the night sweats, the hot flashes, brain fog, mood disturbances. Some women even experience like tinnitus, the ringing in the ear, vertigo, frozen shoulder is a big one that we're hearing about now.
Frozen shoulder.
Yeah,
What's that?
It's so when you have trouble moving your shoulder up above, like, yeah,
A
your
certain
arm.
range,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
You don't have your full movement range.
yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
and some inflammation in the body. Yeah. And just because, I mean, it's a long list of symptoms. I know it might seem scary, but again, depending on your health, really depends on the severity. And you might not get all of those symptoms. One thing to keep in mind is everyone is very different. Women, we're all different in how we're going to go through.
Oh gosh, yeah, it doesn't sound pleasant. We'll just put it that way. And I would think that the brain fog and all of that is attributed to the lack of sleep, which is attributed to the night sweats and the hot flashes. It's all part and parcel, I think.
Yeah, there is a lot of connection with everything for sure, but there are ways you can help reduce the severity of those symptoms. It doesn't have to be a nightmare experience, you know. It is still a natural progression of life. I think it is still a little bit of a evolutionary mystery, but it doesn't have to be awful.
Right. I alluded to this a little bit in the lead, but I've heard some bad and some great things about hormone replacement therapy. So why are so many people hesitant to do this? I've heard it can actually be cancer causing. So what's behind that?
Yeah, so I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't speak too much on hormone replacement therapy, but I can give my opinion. And what happened was in the 90s, there was a health study done, the Women's Health Initiative, and they were, giving hormone therapy to women for hot flashes. And there was some information that came out saying that it was breast cancer causing, but what they didn't share were all the actual benefits that also came with it. And the increase in breast cancer was minor. So I think there's more work that needs to be done and more studies that need to be done. I don't think women should be afraid of hormone replacement therapy. I think finding a practitioner, a doctor, a naturopath who you trust and who you can have a conversation with, and who is knowledgeable in this area to see if it's right for you.
Right, because it is essentially a natural hormone that your body naturally produced that you're just putting back in your body. It seems odd that it would have
bioidentical hormone therapy.
Yeah,
so
no.
I'm open to it, but I am, going to make sure when that time comes, probably in the next 7 years or so, that I find the right practitioner to help me through that.
Well, Liz, you don't seem to mind sharing this publicly, but you personally have had some struggles with hormonal issues and with PMS, and you found some help once you made some health changes in your life. So can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yes. So when I was a teenager and all through my 20s, I really struggled with my hormones. I was on every kind of birth control out there, I think, to try and regulate my hormones or balance out my period, which that's a whole other conversation. It doesn't actually work that way, but I really struggled with, heavy periods, really bad cramping, migraines every month, anxiety, depression, you name it. And it wasn't until I went to school to be a holistic nutritionist that I actually found relief and realized that the power that food has on the body is just incredible. And it completely changed my life.
Okay, so with that in mind, how important is diet then in treating menopause? What kinds of foods tend to be effective in relieving some of these symptoms?
Yeah, so diet is so huge. I am a huge promoter with all of my clients eating real food. So you go to the grocery store and it's one ingredient foods, basically. And if you're, buying processed foods, you're turning it over and you're not just looking at calories, you're looking at ingredients. And if you have a big long list like this, full of things that you can't pronounce, it's probably better to put it back. It's probably
not very natural.
Exactly, yeah. It's going to be very inflammatory. And we don't want that. So eating real food, balancing your blood sugars, and eating anti-inflammatory foods are going to be what help you the most through this transition. So lots of clean, lean proteins, lots of fiber, complex carbs, and healthy fats.
Okay. So
Yeah.
what types of foods then should be avoided?
So the one,
Just the opposite.
long list, a really long list on the back. So the highly processed foods are going to be the hardest on your body because of the amount of inflammation. When you go through menopause, so you are losing a lot of estrogen, and estrogen is very anti-inflammatory. So you're losing all those beautiful anti-inflammatory properties. So for eating inflammatory foods, the transition isn't going to be as smooth, essentially. So highly processed, refined sugars, and your seed oils, so canola oil, sunflower oil, are going to be red flags. And all the things you can't pronounce on the back of a box.
Yeah, exactly. Would any of those foods attribute to stomach issues as well as you're going through that perimenopause, like IBS suddenly creeping up? Is that at all ever an association?
Oh yeah, your gut health is so important. Yeah, so all of those foods are going to disrupt your gut microbiome, which you also don't want to happen during that transition.
Definitely. Now, one of the associated problems with menopause over time also can be decreased bone density and muscle mass. So I'm told that exercise, of course, is one of the solutions naturally. So how much and what kinds of exercise are we talking about here?
Yeah, so muscle building. You don't have to be a bodybuilder, but building muscle, resistance training, picking up some heavy weights 3 to 4 times a week is going to be the most beneficial for you. So muscle protects your bone. And once you're in your 30s, you start to slowly lose bone mass. And then once menopause hits, because of that decrease in estrogen, you're more likely, you're more at risk to have osteoporosis. So the more muscle you have leading up to that, the more protected the bone is at the end of the day. So resistance training, yeah, is your best friend. And like I said, you don't have to go and be a bodybuilder, but you do want to do some progressive overload so that you are constantly stressing and building that muscle.
Right. And of course, we talked about this sleep loss, one of those no fun symptoms of menopause. So what are some of the potential answers for getting a good night's sleep?
Sleep, this one is tricky because, it's one of the first symptoms to come when you start going through that perimenopause transition because you start to lose progesterone. And progesterone is like that calming hormone that helps you sleep. So when you start to lose it, your sleep can become disrupted. So this could be another area where maybe speaking to a professional about HRT could help. But from a natural standpoint, going to bed at a decent hour is going to help, like having a good nighttime routine. Getting off your phone or not watching TV 1 to 2 hours before you go to bed. That blue light can like trick your brain into thinking that it's daytime.
Yeah.
So it's going to really, really have a negative impact on your sleep. Sleeping in a cool room can really help, and having the room nice and dark. If there's light coming in, maybe getting like a face mask. My husband makes fun of me all the time for my little face mask, but
I do it too. Yeah.
I'm sensitive.
Love it.
So yeah. Eating well also is gonna be a big.
The problem with the cool room is that I guess like if you're going through sweats and then that finishes, then you're freezing because your body is soaking wet.
It can be, yeah.
It's just not a good time. And what about dealing with stress? Why is it that it's so much harder to deal with stress while going through this time of life?
Yeah, so when your body gets hit with stress, other functions in your body kind of take a back seat. So like your hormone regulation takes a back seat, fertility takes a back seat, digestion takes a back seat. Stress always wins. So when you're going through the transition, your hormones are kind of on a roller coaster ride, right? And when you add stress in there, well, you're just adding more ups and downs to this roller coaster ride, unfortunately, which you do not want, right? And stress, I always find, can be one of the more challenging topics when I'm working with clients because everyone views it differently. You know, what stresses you out might not stress me out the same.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just wondering, you know, in dealing with hot flashes, in dealing with all of this that's going on, what are some kinds of, like, are there supplements, vitamins, minerals, anything that you would recommend to deal with these symptoms?
Yeah, with supplements, I'll be honest, it's tough to give a whole lot of info here without actually sitting down with someone to know exactly what they're going through.
So
to
it's an
see it.
individual journey.
Totally,
Yeah.
yeah. Like one supplement I could recommend, it would probably be magnesium.
Okay.
Just because it can help with sleep, it can help with mood, it can help with inflammation. But again, like dose, when to take it, what type, is really just going to depend on the person.
What about ashwagandha? I've heard that that can help alleviate hot flashes and help get your sleep cycle back. Is there any truth to that?
You know, ashwagandha is really great for stress. So if you're under a lot of stress, it can be really great at helping kind of balance that out for you, which in turn would help help with your sleep and help with the hot flashes. Yeah, but working directly, I'd have to look into it. I'm not 100% sure if it works directly on hot flash, but as a whole system, it would help, I think. Yeah.
Sounds like such a big topic and it's such an individual journey, like we were saying. So I guess the best advice is to find yourself a practitioner like yourself, right?
Yeah, yeah. You know, really find someone who can help you work on the nutrition piece, the exercise piece, and the supplement piece, because it all works together, right? You can't do one without the others, basically.
If only there were one magic little pill that we
Oh,
can make it all go away.
know, right? Yeah. Yeah. Someone out
Liz.
there must be able to do this for us.
Liz, thanks so much for your advice today and for being on. And how can viewers contact you for help?
Yeah, thank you for having me. The best place to reach me would be on my website, so simplybalancedwithliz.com. And there you can go on to my booking links depending on what type of a session you're looking for. And then on Instagram as well at simplybalanced.holistics.
Okay, because I believe that you do online appointments.
I do, yeah. So virtual and in person if you're here in Kelowna.
Well, thank you so much. Liz Whitcomb is the proprietor of Simply Balanced Holistics. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.